Thanks, Marianne, and good afternoon and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I think we're going to have a really interesting set of presentations, and I hope that it will resonate with some of the work that you're doing. It's nice to see such a spread of interest in all the participants here today. And as I say, I'm sure that the presentations you're going to hear today will resonate and hopefully maybe get you thinking about some things that you could maybe be doing with analytics, and also give you some ideas and some links and references to have a look at as well. We've got three great presentations today taking slightly different views. The three projects are all part of the current Jisc assessment and feedback programme, and we can put a link into the chat window about that in a second. We're going to start off with Rachel Forsyth from the traffic project at Manchester Metropolitan University, and that's really maybe taking slightly more of an institutional view in terms of how analytics can be really effective in terms of helping a sort of institutional-wide curriculum design change programme. Then we're going to move over to Kath Ellis from the EB project at Huddersfield University, and Kath and her colleagues have been looking at using learning analytics more at a departmental level, and they've been doing some really interesting work giving feedback, analytics feedback to students. And then we're going to finish with Julie Zulu from the University of Hertfordshire, and they've been doing some really interesting work around about designing dashboards. And any of you, I'm sure all of you who have got an interest in learning analytics will know that dashboards are one of these kind of buzzwordy things, and they can be, as one of my colleagues said, a bit like Marmite. You can love or hate them, but I think they are useful, but there's an awful lot we need to know about their design and how we can actually use them effectively. So I'm not really going to talk much more. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over now to Rachel to get going for our first presentation. As ever, I know that many of you are very familiar with this software. I'm sure there'll be questions in the chat as well. We'll try and take a list of these questions and then ask them to Rachel and all our other speakers when they finish as well. And if there's other things that we can answer as the presentations are ongoing, we'll do that as well. But as I said, I think it's time for me to stop talking and hand over to the really interesting people for the session. So I'll hand over to you now, Rachel.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm sort of apologising slightly in advance because I'm going to talk quite a bit, quite a few things that I would like to say about the way that we're using analytics on the project. But do put questions up. I'll try and keep an eye on it and talk. I'm not great at multitasking, but I'll do my best. So I'll just give you a little bit of background to the Manchester Metropolitan University project TRAFFIC, which stands for Transforming Assessment and Feedback for Institutional Change. And we've just had a very big institutional curriculum change project. I won't rehearse all of that now. I'm sure some of you have heard about it elsewhere. But the main aim, one of the main aims, was to address the issue of over-assessment, which students have been requesting for quite a long time. And we put a new rule in, which is the maximum of 2 elements of assessment per 30 credit module. Now, before that, we had 10 or 20 credit modules, and we didn't really have a restriction, but our database could cope with up to 9 elements of assessment. So some students were really getting a huge amount of it. We've been rolling that out. So we started in September 2011 with the curriculum model, and so that's been over the lifetime of the TRAFFIC project. So that's just a bit of the background there. We've been really trying to focus on our assessment systems. We haven't done an awful lot of technology development so far, but we've been looking at what needs to go into the systems that we really want. And this life cycle I've just put up is a useful device for reminding us about how things link together and what students and staff need from systems at the different stages. So today I'm just going to talk about how we've used analytics to inform those parts. Ruth, yes, summative assessment tasks. Formative assessment, we're trying to incorporate that as part of the learning. And no, the number of assessed tasks is not. We aim for 25% of the student time spent on assessed work. That's Tim's question. So 25% is 75 hours on a 30 credit module. And yes, I would agree that it's not necessarily a win. A lot of the curriculum design part has been about trying to make it more of a win. But perhaps that'll come up as we go on. So if I take just different aspects of this cycle, just for examples, I'm going to look first of all at submitting, which is number 4 here. And we, as part of one of the early things that we've done, is to set up a coursework submission receipting database. So that contains information about handing dates, and students can then print out a coursework cover sheet, so like this, which is personalised to them, and it has a barcode on it. So instead of queuing up for hours to hand in their work now, they can put it into a blue box, which unfortunately started life being called a blue bin, which we didn't think was a very nice thing to call somewhere where you put your assignments, but it's now called a blue box. They don't have to queue up, and as soon as the barcode is scanned, they get an automated receipt from the system. So that's a great system. It really helps students. And the information from that we now feed into, this is part of our Moodle installation, it feeds directly into Moodle so that students can see exactly what's coming up and what they should do about it. So that's something that we set up already. Now when we started doing some analytics on this, we found some useful admin information. So we can see where we've got peaks. These show peaks of submission. This is Christmas and this is Easter. That won't be any great surprise to anybody, but at least we know the scale of the problem and we can manage some of the administration associated with it. So you can see, I hope you can see, I've got a very big screen here, but that's almost 20,000 assignments being handed in March. That's just before our Easter break, and another 15,500 the first week back, so a couple of weeks ago. So that was really helpful for administration. It gave us lots of help with planning. We could put more stuff in to read the barcodes and so on. Great. Very popular with students, especially the link to Moodle here, and especially when we then linked in their marks, their provisional marks. Obviously have to go to an exam board, and those are now automatically fed into the same system from our student record system. Hugely popular with students. The whole thing has had 8.3 million hits from students since the beginning of January last year. So that's a win for us, but it's very focused on administration. It's just about solving the admin problem of getting assignments in on time. So that was really helpful, but we decided we needed to drill down a little bit more. We needed to know about managing other assignments. And when we started looking at what kinds of assignment tasks we had, I should have said that as part of this system, we set up a database to log information about individual modules, including what types of assignment they were, which we never really had in a helpful way before. So when we started doing that, we discovered that the paper-based assignments that this receipting database dealt with were actually only about 30% of what students were doing. And we have lots of other things going on, like in-class tests, multiple choice, presentations, performances, and so on, which are completely ignored by any of our management systems. So that's starting to be a bit of an issue for us. Also, we found that the coursework receipting system, fantastic though it was, helped us not at all with returning work to students. It only helped us with returning the marks. So how can we bring some of the benefits we found from that small system to other submissions? We really wanted to start planning for a bigger system. So we started to drill down a little bit. We started looking at what's happening in individual modules. So I'm looking here at the part of the life cycle I showed you then, specifying the module, the type of assignment. We do this at the point when the course is approved. So we have information about that. And we started to break that down. So the purple ones are level 4 assignments for this year, and the grey ones are level 5 assignments. Now, you won't be at all surprised by the types of assignments that are there. They're all tried and trusted and very popular. But this one was new for us, portfolios. We had no idea that they were forming such a large part of our assessment diet. Now, part of that is in response, and I think Tim will not be surprised here, that was an academic's response to having a restriction on the number of assignments. So portfolios were designed to address that for some people. And what that has made us do, looking at this data, is we've started to look very carefully at what people are saying about their portfolios. so that we can ensure that they really are portfolios and not as some of the ones that we saw with things like 1 multiple choice test, 5 lab reports, 1 in-class test and a presentation, which doesn't really fit the description of a portfolio unless you put quite a lot of reflective work with it. So that's helped us in terms of academic development, because we've now been able to focus a bit more attention on giving support for particular kinds of assessment. I'll just put a link in the chat box there to our website. This is all freely available Creative Commons information if you want to pick up on it. I'll just show you a couple of screen grabs now. So underneath that link there, people can pick out different types of assignment, and then they can drill down and find out a little bit more about it. So particularly portfolios, we've characterised 2 different types of portfolio and how they might be set up. And the front of these pages has a little bit of information, and the back one gives some information on design. So we use those as downloadable sheets as well as websites. So we've got extra resources both for our popular types of assignment, but also for assignments that people are starting to use but may not feel very confident in using, such as blogs, but there are plenty of others as well. So that was how we've used the analytics for academic development. We've started to get people to think about their assessment design, so right at the beginning of the process. But we also wanted to start looking at other parts of the process, so looking at marking and feedback. And I do apologise if this is a bit faint on the screens. It's a plot that's come directly out of Stats Package R, and we're a bit novice using it, haven't quite got the sizes right yet. But what it shows is it's a density plot, so effectively showing the frequency. Yeah, R. It's showing the frequency that students are likely to get a particular mark. Now, a lot of you will be familiar with the work of York and Wolf about 10, 12 years ago, looking at this on a larger scale. And we started to try and break it down for our own institution here. Now, this one here, I hope you can see me moving thing, is maths, which literature suggests would be flatter and broader than others, which it is. And these are more for social science and computing science and business and admin, this one here, the greeny one. So what it shows us is that our staff mark within very narrow confines, which lots of people do, and literature shows that that's the case. But having this data from our own staff and our own students is a fantastic discussion point for opening the discussion about why is that. And external examiners here, as I'm sure elsewhere, castigate us regularly for not marking to the full range. And this is clear evidence that at a very institutional level, we're at a JACS code level, in fact here, we are quite poor at marking across the range. So is that something to do with us? Is it something to do with our students? It's a good discussion point. We have now developed new grade descriptors which are designed to make marking more reliable across the institution. I'm not going to put them up here, but they are a direct result of looking at this kind of analytics and talking to people about why the shape of the curve is as it is. We've also, as a result of looking at some of this data, renewed our emphasis on feedback, and where this really comes in is looking at the satisfaction that students have had. We have seen some improvement here. I'm very open. I mean, obviously you can all get NSS data, but we are open about it. You can look at the tables and see that we have way to go in terms of improving. But the whole point of our curriculum change was really to address this aspect here, which is organisation and management. And we have made quite significant improvements in that, as you can see. But we also, like everybody else, wanted to improve assessment and feedback, and we're making some tiny little improvements there. So it's helped us to reflect on that. And what we've done with analytics here is to use them to look at predictors of student satisfaction. So I'm sorry I'm going through this really fast, but I know that we haven't got a huge amount of time. I do want to go to speed up and then do that. So what this shows here, this is level 4 and level 5. Level 6, we haven't rolled out our curriculum change yet, so we aren't really counting that data. This is from our internal student survey, which mimics the national student survey. And we can see that there is some small connection, it is very small, between student satisfaction, overall student satisfaction, and a couple of features of assessment, which is the number of hand-ins that they have and the way that those are bunched. And when we had very large numbers of hand-ins across the programme, across the whole year, which, as I said, we've tried to reduce, but there are still some of our level 6 students who filled in this survey who've got a lot of hand-ins. It is actually at a significant level and some dependence on the number of hand-ins. So it does reflect what students have said to us in comments, that they want to keep that down. So that was all I wanted to say, because I know that Catherine, so I just wanted to give you some flavour of how we've used large-scale institutional data, but we're feeding into our systems at systems level, at course level, and in some cases we've been talking to individuals about things as well. Thank you. Oh, Gavin, yes, why do we mark it all? This is really useful, having this kind of data for having those conversations with academic staff about what is it you're trying to do with your marking. I agree. Either they reach the learning outcome or they don't, that's fine, but then we have to differentiate their performance across a range. But I would love to have that discussion with Gavin elsewhere. I know we haven't got time today. So I'm going to hand over now.
Thanks, Rachel. That was a fascinating overview, and I'm sure it's stimulating lots of thoughts for everybody. We do have time for a quick question or two just now if anyone wants to ask. We've got, does anybody want to ask a question using the microphone if you raise your hand? If not, what we might do, I think, just given our time limitations, is I think we might move on to Kath and make sure, and then Julian, make sure we get presentations. That might give us a little bit more time at the end for some questions. But obviously we've got the chat to follow things up. So thanks again to Rachel, and we'll just move on to Kath now. From Kath Ellis about the eBeam project at the University of Huddersfield. Over to you, Kath.
Hi everybody. Perhaps somebody could give me a wave to let me know that you can hear me clearly enough, because I did. Thank you. Okay, so thank you everybody, you can stop waving. So what I'm going to be doing is talking to you about things on a slightly different level to the work that Rachel has done. And I think Rachel and I have done a lot of talking across the Pennines about the work that our respective projects have done. And I think we've got a lot of work that's doing complementary stuff, but we are really looking at very different areas of focus. And so effectively what we're doing now here is moving from Rachel's very beautiful and elegant big data to putting some of this into practice in a more sort of small data level. And I'm afraid I'm Australian, so I say data and not data, so you're all going to have to put up with that, I'm afraid. And what I want to do, though, in this presentation is sort of start from sort of looking at what learning analytics is and some of the work that's being done on it. Now, learning analytics is a very new field. It's a very new area of research, so there are bound to be big gaps in it. But to my mind, from the literature research that I've done or the literature review that I've done, it has two really key points of focus. It's got a very heavy emphasis on social networks and how we analyse relationships between students functioning in social networks. And it also has a very heavy emphasis on retention. And outside of that, I see that there are lots of big gaps. Now, part of this is obviously because the work just hasn't been done yet, but part of it is also because I don't think people have started to think about looking in some of these other areas. Now, I have a bit of a problem with these 2 points of focus. In terms of looking at social networks, and particularly what's called SNA, or social network analytics, I think it's very interesting and I think it's very clever, but I don't think it's particularly useful in terms of the learning side of learning analytics. I've struggled to understand how, as a teacher, I can put that to use in terms of benefiting student learning. On the side of the focus on retention, the problem I have with that is that it focuses on a very small subset of students and doesn't really give us the opportunity to look at learning across the whole achievement spectrum. Now, coupled with this is the big word, and they are big words, institutionalised operationalisation. It's one of my favourite phrases that I do love to use. Try saying it quickly with chocolate in your mouth or something. But a lot of institutions are at the moment having a think about how do we start putting this into practice? How can we start rolling it out across institutionalised level? Rachel's already showed us some of the ways in which that's been done. I would argue that's looking more at what I'd call an academic analytics side of things, focusing on things to do with behaviours and responses from students. I'd be interested to hear what Rachel thinks about whether she thinks it's learning analytics or academic analytics, and that's probably a debate she and I can have elsewhere. But I'm particularly interested in the learning sides of this and how can we focus on the data that we're using to benefit student learning, and how can we operationalise this across an institution. Now, if we bring these two things together, I think we've got a bit of a problem. First of all, because a very small proportion of students are engaging with each other in social networks as part of their learning. And secondly, because only a very small proportion of students are actually at risk of falling away, withdrawing, failing, and so forth. And I'm interested in how we can broaden this across the student body more effectively. So one of the things I propose in some of the work that I've been doing, particularly as the eBeam project, but also in a paper that's about to be published in BJET, is that I think we need to turn our focus to one of these gaps that's in the learning analytics literature, and that's to do with assessment. All the research I've done hasn't really considered assessment data as part of a learning analytics strategy, and I think the work that Rachel's doing at Manchester and the work that we're doing here at Huddersfield is starting to fill in some of those gaps. But starting with the question, why should we use assessment analytics? And I think that the quick and easy answer to that is that all students are assessed and all tutors mark student work. So on the first level, it's ubiquitous. It's routine and it's normative. It's something that everybody expects to do, and everybody and all students expect to have done to them. As a result, it's widely understood. It's expected. It's expected of tutors. It's expected of students, and everyone gets it. Everyone gets what assessment is. I think this is where the overlap with Rachel's work is most interesting to me, because of course what people get as assessment is very much sort of mired in old traditional structures of what assessment is and should be, with things like examinations and so forth. And that's where that work that they're doing over in Manchester and mine really kind of works productively, I think. But I think the other layer that we need to think about in terms of why we should use assessment analytics or assessment data is because assessment is important. It's very important in terms of what students are paying for. Madalena Terrace makes the argument that, particularly in a fee-paying culture, assessment are the things that students get as a return on their investment. It's what they're paying for. It's not that they're paying for grades, but they're paying for that accreditation. As a result of that, it's what tutors are paid to do. It's where our expertise and our expert judgment comes in, and therefore it's why we command the salaries that we can. And the other thing that I think it's important is that assessment is most closely linked to what we measure as achievement, and it's not just interested in retention, and that's why I think it's a really good place to start looking for how we might operationalise assessment, learning analytics into the institution. So this is how I see it kind of fitting, I guess, is I see learning analytics as a subset of academic analytics, which really I see as a euphemism for the business intelligence that is taking place in the HE sector. Learning analytics, to me, as I said, is focused on retention and to a lesser extent achievement. But assessment analytics is really assessment data used within a learning analytics strategy. So thinking about how we might look at things like retention and achievement through the data that we gather from assessment. Now, the data that Rachel's already been showing you is kind of, as she said, at the institutional macro level. It's looking at things to do with submission, types of assessment, all sorts of things like that. Mine's looking below that level. Now, I would argue that one of the reasons why we haven't really considered assessment analytics as part of a learning analytics strategy to this point, or we've never done this work before, is because we haven't had data that's at an appropriate level of granularity. Now, this diagram represents the kind of granularity that we currently collect as a part of our normal day-to-day business in higher education institutions, going from the highest level or the largest level of granularity from degree classification that students achieve at the end of their course of study. The next layer of granularity below that would be, say, their grade point average at the end of a year. So their progression statistics, it's often referred to as exit trajectory. The level below that would be individual module results, and obviously the level below that would be task results for individual types of assessment, so individual items of assessment. And of course, when we've been looking at Rachel's data, there is of course the difference, between, say, a portfolio piece of assessment. Now, one of the problems we have with that is even at this most granular level, this smallest level, one student who gets a mark of, say, 56 for a piece of assessment could have reached that 56 for completely different reasons for somebody else who gets that same 56. So the granularity at that level, even still, isn't telling us a huge amount. So the work that we've been doing in the eBeam project is seeing if we can get to a level of granularity below that, or a finer level of granularity. And so what we're looking at is layers below that, and I guess this next diagram sort of sits within this larger diagram. The next layer of granularity would be how have students achieved that number, that 56 or that 68 or whatever, against a set of explicit assessment criteria. And then lower than that, what might be common areas or even common strengths that are emerging within the actual structure of the assessment that they have submitted. So the tool that we've been looking at in particular is a tool called GradeMark, which is part of the Turnitin suite, which is a marking tool. And effectively what it does is it gathers up the data trail that we leave behind as we mark student work. It's a data trail we've always left behind as we've marked student work. It's just that that data trail previously has been left behind with pen marks on paper. And now it's being left behind with things like decisions on a rubric and quick marks or comments left behind on a piece of student writing or of student performance. So we've never had this level of granularity before. Well, to be correct, we have had this level of granularity before. We've just never been able to collect and collate the data at any sort of level of efficiency. It's just not been viable before. As a result, I argue it's been unthinkable. It's just been, the thought of actually sitting and counting up how many errors have been marked on student work is just sort of an unthinkable thing. It would be so time consuming as to not be worth doing it. But now, because we have a tool that collects this data as we mark and puts it together into a data set for us that we can then draw down and analyse, we're able to see patterns emerging and confirm suspicions, back up with quantitative data, anecdotal evidence that we as tacit knowledge holders have always known. And the question that we're asking in the eBeam project is, what might we do with this? So one of the other sides of things that we're interested in is how might this tell us interesting stuff about ipsative development or ipsative development of students, particularly improvement of individual students over time. So can we see, for instance, that errors that were emerging in a piece of student work in, say, formative assessment were disappearing by the time that the summative assessment was submitted? In other words, are the students actively acting on the feedback that they're given on their formative assessment to actually improve their work for summative? And similarly, can we see improvement from a student in first year through to second year through to third year? So instead of looking at their summative results and their degree classification at the end of their degree, now we're actually able to look into that as they're moving through their degree and give them bespoke individual support which they need when they need it, rather than stabbing in the dark as to where we think the problems might be. We can also now easily measure ipsative improvement between cohorts. So we could, for instance, look at the behaviour or the performance of a cohort of students doing a particular assessment task in a particular module, then put in some intervention to work or target a particular weakness that's evident in that data, and then measure to see whether that's been improved upon in the next cohort of students. Now, as Sheila said at the very beginning, one of the things we're really interested in doing is seeing how this might function at the departmental level. Most of the work I've been doing and the eBeam project has been doing has been focused very much at the module level to test some of these ideas out. And we've looked very closely at two particular modules, one which is a module of around about 100 students at second year level in an English literature degree, and another one which is a module which is taught to roughly 1,000 students. It varies obviously from year to year, but roughly 1,000 students taught over 50 campuses by 60 tutors in a collaborative provision through the PCET degree in the School of Education and Professional Development. Part of what we're trying to test here is how it works in a sort of normal garden variety module and how it might work in the most extreme size of module in a distributed or distance learning setting, to see whether these sorts of ideas are scalable. So at the department level, the next step for us is how we might coordinate the approach that we're putting into our marking. And this is the next step that we're looking in the academic year, and we're looking at the English Literature Department in particular for this. And we're looking at a coordinated approach, so how we might share comment sets across a teaching team across a whole course, how this might be productively and linked and aligned to other support materials such as resources, writing handbooks, academic skills tutor support and so forth. The idea here is that we all want to be sort of giving students feedback that's, if you like, singing off the same song sheet or the same hymn sheet, to try and address that perception that some students have that we're giving them mixed feedback and they have to write to the marker. So we're trying to address that by actually saying, no, we're all saying the same thing in the same way. Then from that we want to pull the data, and we want to be able to use the data in a way which is at the student level, the individual student level, so finding the students that need the most individual help. At the module level, so that we can look at in-year support, bespoke support, but also to look at the course level so that we can see improvements across the whole course. And then eventually what we want to do is feed all of this through to some kind of a dashboard. We'd like there to be a student-facing dashboard, a tutor-facing dashboard, and perhaps an institution or even a PSRB-facing dashboard, so that when, say, Ofsted comes to my colleagues in education and says, we need to know answers to these questions, we're able to provide the questions quite quickly and easily. So to finish with, I just want to show you some graphs because Rachel's outgraphed me well and truly, but this is the kind of data that I do show my students. Now this is the sort of data or graphic representation of data that we would normally be able to show students. It's simply measuring student achievement from left to right, from the students who got a third right through to the students who got a first against a particular assessment task. Now, we can currently do this, so this isn't doing anything particularly new. But what we have been able to do is map underneath that. This is exactly the same graph, but each column is an individual student. How strong the introductions of the student essays have been. And so all we're doing here is laying down a very specific data trail that's making a judgment on the quality of the introduction from a strong introduction, a weak introduction, or a missing introduction, and then being able to show students how that maps against the final achievement results. Of course, we communicate this to students in a way that says this isn't, having a strong introduction doesn't give you a first, but there is a clear correlation between having a strong introduction and having a good argument, and that then translates through to a first. So this is the sort of evidence that we're now showing students. What we're interested in looking at is what impact that has on them, particularly on their motivation to act on their feedback and do something with their feedback, but also on the emotional responses that they see to this data. So that's just to give you a taste of the kind of data that we're working with and the ways that we're showing it to students and the things that we're evaluating. And that's pretty much it from me.
Oh, thanks, Kath. That was great. Do we have any questions for Kath just now? Anyone wants to raise their hand? Okay. I think, again, just in given our time considerations, we'll move on to Julie now, and then that should give us a couple of minutes for some general discussion at the end. So I'll just move the slides forward. Thanks again, Kath. Another great insight into learning analytics and the potential of them. And I'll pass over to Julie now.
Thanks, Sheila. What I want to do in this section is to share the work that we're doing here at Hertfordshire, which is part of the iTeam project. And this particular part is our focus on the development of a student dashboard. It is still very much a work in progress, but I guess perhaps the difference between this presentation and Rachel's and Cass is that this is kind of bringing it down to the individual academic and student perspective. So I'll share some screenshots in a moment and show you what it looks like, because that's what most people ask us. But just to start with, this development pulls together information really about the students' engagement with the module resources that sit within our virtual learning environment that's called StudyNet here at Hertfordshire. And it combines that with assessment performance information, so the grades that they're getting. It is reliant on the information that's submitted electronically, so we have quite a large number of assessments that come in through our electronic submission portal, but we also have a number that sit outside of that, and certain entire schools that don't really use the electronic submission facility. So it can only work with the information that it has, and at the moment, as I say, that's around how the student engages with the resources, or really the number of times they engage with the resources in the VLE, and whatever assessment data actually is pulled into it. So the purpose behind it is to try and promote student self-regulation. It's about giving them information that they can then act on. It's about providing information in one place that shows them what their progress is, and hopefully flags to them where they need to go for extra support in terms of improving their performance. So it's very much has that focus on empowering them to do something to improve their position in terms of their progress. And it also has the staff view, where staff can equally step in. We hope to identify either individuals or groups of students who again are needing extra support or guidance. So that's the purpose of it, some of the thinking behind it. This is what our course monitoring dashboard looks like. So this is the academic view, and in this screenshot you can see here we've got what would be the students' names in the column here that are actually blanked out at the moment, but this would be our cohort of students. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I've got the pointer on here, so. And then we've got the column here for StudyNet usage, which shows, that's our VLE, that shows whether students are hitting into the resources or not. And in this case, there's a whole column of green ticks, which shows our students are reaching a particular threshold, a threshold that we've already set as to how often they're getting into the modules. We've then got a column looking at the assignments, so what the performance there is, and again it's a traffic light system, so where the students aren't performing so well, there's a green flag, a red flag there suggesting we need to look more closely at it, or there's an amber flag, which may simply be because the assignment isn't electronically submitted, so the data isn't there. And then we have an overall status column in which we can see that with the module engagement alongside the performance, the assessment performance, what their overall status is, and importantly flagging up those students who perhaps underperforming and need us to step in. So this is what an academic would see. We've also got a box that enables us to set some filters there. We can flag in particular our green students that are doing fine, or we can pull out the red students that we're concerned about, and we can set the thresholds that we want to benchmark the students against. Clearly with some of our modules we're actually not expecting a huge amount of engagement with resources. In our health programs, for example, we have students out on practice, and they may have a practice-based module where actually the engagement with resources online is going to be relatively limited, in which case we'd set a lower threshold for to benchmark against. On the other hand, if we have a course where there's an expectation, a lot of resources they're going to need to engage with and work with, then we would set that threshold at a higher level. So that's down to the individual academic. But what it does is it gives us a one view of a cohort, and it enables us at a quick glance to identify students who need more support. it has limitations. It is a work in progress, and it is very much dependent on what information goes in there, of course. So a lot of our work at the moment has been around talking to staff around what they actually want to see in there, what the limits are, how they interpret that, and how, of course, we then use that to support our students. Right now, it's just information. The next step for us is to think about how that information will actually influence what we do with our students. So this is the academic view. This is what the student sees. So as an academic, I can drill down to a student level picture, or the student can click on their own portal and see this dashboard. So in here they've got all their modules listed, and again the same traffic light system. In this case, this particular student is performing reasonably well. They've got a list of modules. They've got one or two red flags which are under the engagement column. But it's not a problem because they're doing well in their assignments, and overall their status is, gets a green tick. We've got the individual bars. This blue line that runs across the graph shows the module average. So where the bars sit below that average, then the students may be concerned about their falling below their peers. Where they sit above, then hopefully they're performing above average. The red columns there show how much the students are engaging with StudyNet. And there's no particular reason around the red or the green, but there's been a lot of debate here on different colours and what they may subliminally suggest to the students. But we're at red and green at the moment. So the red column shows engagement with module resources. This student is falling well below their peers. That doesn't mean to say they won't perform well in their assessments, and there may be lots of reasons why they either don't need to go in and out of their resources, or actually a one hit and a download of the resources is sufficient for them. So there are lots of issues there about multiple hits, or the more hits you have on a module resource doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a student who's got a high level of engagement or who's performing better. It may simply be that they're struggling to get into the system, that they're repeatedly downloading things, or they can't find what they need and they're opening and closing resources, and that's pushing up their number of hits. So we're very aware that that information is open to interpretation. The green bar then shows, in this case, the student's grade. This student has a grade of 60 for this particular module. The average module grade is 58.59, so they're just sitting slightly above it. And we've got each of the modules then on that graph that show how they're doing. Where the green bar is missing, that's usually because the assessment isn't submitted electronically, so we don't have that information. And one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment is to get the exam information into there, and also information that we might use, for example, through electronic voting systems or question mark perception, which we use here as our out-of-class software, and we're looking at how we integrate those results so they will also be pulled into the dashboard data to give a much more comprehensive picture. So also on this picture then we've got, there's this information, this column on the far right side, the knowledge, understanding, application. In fact, that links to some online feedback radio buttons that we have that sit in our electronic submission system. But we're currently changing that, and at the moment the usage of that is around about 15 to 20% for the whole university. So we're in the process actually of moving to another system. At the moment it means that people who do use that, we can pull out that data and we can put it here for the students and show if there are particular aspects of their work. For example, this student is, in terms of the analysis, perhaps doing less well than they are around knowledge and understanding. So we're still working on that. How can we pull out for students the sort of information that's meaningful for them? What can they then take back to in terms of revision, or to a tutorial, or to our academic skills unit, and say, this is where I need to develop or improve what I'm doing. So again, a work in progress at the moment. We are changing that system come semester A, so it will look different again. So that's what our students see, and that's what our academics see. We talk to our students about what this might look like for them, and these are just some statements of the kind of feedback they gave us. My colleague Liz, who's also in the IT team, and I think she's in the chat room today, has done a lot of work with students, with focus groups, and talking to them about, this is what we can show you, but do you actually want this, and what will you do with it if we give it to you? In terms of the design, they were very clear they wanted to be benchmarked against their peers. They wanted to know how they were doing in relation to others, and they felt quite strongly that would be a motivator for them. We asked them quite specifically, did they have concerns about being demotivated if they saw themselves as falling behind? And the message that we've been getting is, on the whole, no. We actually want to know. That would encourage us to do more if we felt we were slipping behind a cohort. Understandably, they wanted the currency of the data. They want to know that what they're looking at is live and real time for them, which again goes back to our at the moment, our work in trying to get the exam data in there, because students, the more comprehensive it is, the more meaningful it is for them. They would love to have a predictor or a calculator for their final classification. They were very focused on how am I doing, and they want something visual that shows them how much more work do I need to do to get my first. And we were surprised by the strength of their feeling in terms of that focus on their end point. They also, and this is only a snippet of some of their feedback, and these are kind of the most common statements that came out, but they wanted reassurance that their information would only be seen by those needing it. And that was quite a strong feeling that emerged from our discussions. They don't want anybody and everybody looking at their information. They had a real sense of ownership of it, and because of that they felt that it really only needed to be seen by personal tutors and by program tutors. And they, of course, being students, they were quite innovative, and they said, what else can you put in there that would be useful for us? Is a dashboard. Actually, we'd like to have a lot more in it. We'd like to know, for example, how we're doing on our book loans. And we as academics would quite like to put attendance rates in there. The students said we're more interested in you telling us what the average module pass or fail rate is, so we can decide whether to subscribe to this module in our next year. So we have different ideas about what might go in there, but the message was we want it all in one place. Tell us as much as you can about our studies, and not just about our performance, but about other of the soft aspects of our studies. And the more that's in one place for us, the easier it's going to be. They very much want that one-click approach. So that's a flavour of the kind of feedback they gave us. In terms of design, I'm conscious of the time, I won't go through all the different things that we thought about, but these green headings here have been really how we've thought about the different aspects of design for the dashboard. So there are some very general comments that we've had to think about. There are issues about access, who gets into the dashboard and how is that access, how do we gatekeep it? There are issues about display. Do we want green and red graphs? Do we want traffic light system? Is this what will work best for people? We've obviously talked about content, what goes in there, and how do we make sure that the content is as comprehensive as possible. And importantly, the support. So here's just flagging some of the things we've been thinking about in terms of display and support. But support because whoever uses it, student or staff, they really need to understand what they're looking at. And we need to talk to people about how you might then use that data. And just to finish on, we haven't done perhaps the same kind of work that Rachel and Kath have been looking at, but that's clearly where we're heading to. What do we do with this information? We've got information now that tells us, for example, we can look at the average grade for a module against the module hits, and we can look and see if there are correlations there. We can also look for correlations between the average grade and the assignment hand-in times. And we know that students that hand in within 24 hours of the deadline do less well than those students who hand in a week before. But they do better than those students that hand in a week late. So we can use that information, but I think where we're at the moment is how do we translate that for the students? How do we put that into something that's then useful for students, which is something Kath, and I think probably Kath and Rachel have both mentioned, but Kath in particular, about, when does that become useful? So that's where I leave it, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. That was great. There are a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll just go through. Kenji Lam asked just now, how is engagement currently being measured? Is that just time spent on StudyNet, or are there other things you're looking at as well?
The engagement at the moment is focused on just on the module resources, so it is very, you know, it is just a small picture of overall engagement.
Great, thank you. And Peter Chaston raised a very interesting point, and he's saying, could all this place too much emphasis on the mark as opposed to getting the students to focus more on feedback, feed forwards? I think that was in relation to the dashboard that you showed.
I think that is a problem. I think we all recognise it. You know, the conversation is about assessment and the grades. It's about the endpoints, and that in itself has, you know, we have problems there. We already know that's what students focus on. So yes, are we just reiterating that message? Of course, we have got other work in the ITeam project that is looking at the feedback side, and we've got some development work going on at the same time as this, which is focusing on feedback and how that's given for feed forward. But I completely accept that.
I think maybe we can go back to this, but I think some of the work that Kath's been doing in terms of having more a workshop approach as well, giving I suppose more specific feedback on assignments might begin to address some of those issues, but we can maybe go back to that if Kath feels she wants to. But just the last question for you was one from Sharon, and of course this is the bottom line for everyone. What's the cost of combining all of the data onto one dashboard? I don't know if you'll be able to give an answer, but
I don't know, but I just spotted that question while you were talking, and I have no idea and haven't thought about it. So thank you, Sharon. It's something to think about, isn't it? I've no idea. I don't know what the cost, I mean, I know what the development cost, you know, some of those costs have been for us, but that is one to consider.
I suppose that, yeah, I get that the development, the startup cost might be, in terms of time, might be high, but you would imagine that, or you would hope that that would be something that once you had the systems in place, that would even out at some point. I suppose it's just actually making sure that people realise that the investment is worthwhile and you are actually giving something back. The staff and students can see the benefits of that investment. Oh, and Mark's saying about 100 to 150k at a guess. Again, thank you, Julie. That was a great another great presentation. We have got a couple of minutes left. Would anyone else like to ask any questions or on the microphone before we finish? I know there's a few things coming through on the chat board.
I think Peter's got his hand up there.
Oh, right, Peter.
Okay, thanks. It's just a general kind of link with another project. At City University, they've used a tool called Feedback Plus, or it used to be called eReflect, developed by Westminster, which they've embedded in it common mistakes that students make, and they've embedded these common mistakes into a kind of online questionnaire which students run either before they submit an assignment or afterwards to get them to reflect on those kind of common things. And I was just thinking that with learner analytics, if you sort of start determining these kind of common areas where students fail on, you could complement that by using that tool called Feedback Plus. I'll put a link into the text chat about that. It's developed by University of Westminster.
Thanks, Peter. That's another really useful link. Do we have got a few more seconds if anyone else would like to ask a question? Well, there's nothing else. I mean, I think there's been 3 fascinating presentations, and really nice to see how the linkages between all the projects, even though you've all been looking at a slightly different aspect of analytics. I think it shows the potential for this area and also some of the pitfalls. But I think, as with anything, the more we can share practice amongst each other, the better, and we can start actually developing and using systems that will make an impact to everyday. Yeah, absolutely, Kath. It is early days. At CETUS, we're actually doing a bit of work, and I've done a case study with Kath and some of the work she's been doing, hoping to do one with Julie and with Rachel as well and the team at MNU. So we can start sharing that as well. And again, there are links, I think in the chat there's links to all the projects, and the recordings will be made available. But I think just now, if we could all just give our speakers a virtual round of applause. There's been 3 fascinating presentations. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheila. Just a reminder to everybody to fully exit the room, and we will share the recording afterwards with you as well, so you can pass it on to colleagues or review any of it again. So yeah, if you just either just close the window or file and exit, that would be great. Thank you.